Hello and welcome to this session. Today what we are going to do is have a look at our stakeholder mapping, and we'll break down each of the sections of our stakeholder map, which is manage closely, keep satisfied, keep informed, and finally our minimal effort. But to start off with, let's understand what we mean by a stakeholder map. Essentially, a stakeholder map is a tool which we use to categorize the different stakeholders of a business. And the way we categorize this is by using two metrics, basically. We look at the power and influence they have over the business and also the interest that they have within the business. So firstly, let's take a look at what we mean by power and influence. In essence, it's about their ability to try and influence different business decisions. So, do they have a lot of control over important resources that the business needs? Are they important within our decision making? And do they potentially have the ability to impact our reputation, whether it's giving us a positive brand image or a negative brand image? Or maybe they have certain legal authority over the business. So once again, they have a lot of power and say about how we conduct our activities. Next thing we have is the level of interest that they might have into the business. So this is basically a measure of concern over the decision making. And it's normally about how our decisions will impact them. So if I make a decision, are they going to be impacted in a positive or a negative way? And it also indicates how much interaction the stakeholder requires. Do they need lots of information from the business, or are they happy just to take a bit of a hands-off approach and not really know too much of what we're getting up to? Now, in terms of drawing out our stakeholder map, as I said, we've got two axes. On the y-axis, we have interest, and on the x-axis, we have power. To keep it really simple, we just measure this on a scale of high to low. Now, a stakeholder who has very low interest and also very low power, we treat these as having minimal effort. So we don't really need to put much effort into communicating or making sure that they're happy with our decisions. The next one we have is when our stakeholder has a high level of interest but a low level of power. What we want to do is we want to keep them informed, because they are going to be impacted by our decisions, but they don't necessarily have a strong influence over our decisions. They just require, regular communication. Then we have our stakeholders who we want to keep satisfied. These are the stakeholder groups who have a high level of power and influence over our decisions, but they don't really have too much of an interest. So we just want to make sure we keep them satisfied. We're not really annoying them or upsetting them, because at the end of the day, they might have legal authority over us. They might have important resources that we need. And finally, we have our most important stakeholder group. And these are stakeholders who have a high level of power and a high level of interest in our decisions. And what we want to do, we want to make sure we manage these closely. So we've looked at what we mean by stakeholder map. Let's go in terms of the advantages and the disadvantages for a business using a stakeholder map. Firstly, as you can imagine, it helps us categorize and manage our stakeholders, because by putting them into those individual categories, the business now knows how much energy, how much effort, how much resources do we need to invest in each stakeholder. It also identifies who are those key stakeholder groups for our decision making. Of course, the manage closely are going to be the most important, the minimal effort are going to be the least important. And it also helps us improve our communication with different stakeholders, because, let's say, for example, the keep informed versus minimal effort. As a business, we now know to spend more time, more effort, more resources communicating with the stakeholders who have a higher level of interest than the ones who don't really have a higher level of interest. And it also helps with our conflict resolution. So for example, let's say our manage closely and our minimal effort stakeholders were arguing with each other and we didn't know who to satisfy. Well, logically, we want to satisfy the ones who would come up in the manage closely, because they're one of our key stakeholder groups. Nevertheless, there are some drawbacks that we do need to consider. First of all, stakeholder interest and influence can change over time. So even though you've managed them and even though that you've set them in certain areas of the stakeholder map, That doesn't mean that they will just stay there forever. They will begin to change over time. And we can also make the argument and the evaluation that when we are putting these stakeholders into different areas of the stakeholder map, it can be a bit of a subjective decision. So someone has probably created that and they said, well, this stakeholder, I think they are informed rather than managed closely. But this is a subjective decision which can be wrong. And overall, it depends on how accurate it is about whether we are going to use the stakeholder map for improving our decision making. Is the stakeholder map accurate? Have the different stakeholder groups been put into the right areas? And then looking at all these different options will obviously depend on how good that decision is what we're making. So we've covered a bit of an overview of our stakeholder maps, the pros and the cons. Let's now break down each area of our stakeholder map in a little bit more detail. Starting off with the manage closely. So our manage closely, this is the most powerful, the most important group within our stakeholders. And they are of high interest and have a high level of power and influence over our decision making. These, as we said, they will have a major influence. So we want to make sure these stakeholders are kept happy. So within the decision-making process, we want to collaborate with them. We want to communicate with them. We want to engage with them to understand what they want from the decision. Because we want to aim to build that strong relationship between us and that stakeholder group. And just some examples which could potentially fall under the manage closely. This isn't going to be the case all the time. It can depend on different scenarios and situations. But first of all, we've got our major customers, our shareholders, our major suppliers, any different senior executives such as CEOs, CFOs, obviously shareholders, only the shareholders who have quite a large share within the business. So let's say, for example, the majority shareholders who own like 40 to 50% of the business. These are all great examples of those manage closely stakeholders. The next stakeholder group on the list we have is keep satisfied. Now our keep satisfied stakeholders, they are a very powerful group. They have a large amount of influence over our decisions, but they don't necessarily take great levels of interest. They may not necessarily be directly impacted by the decision that we are making. As they are a powerful group, we want to make sure that we do address their concerns very quickly. We don't want to make sure that they're upset with our decisions because, as we did say, they can change. They can become a keep satisfied to a manage closely. When we are making our decisions, they're the ones who may be holding on the resources that we need. So it is important that we engage and consult with this group who, once again, just make sure that they're happy. Make sure that we understand what decision that they want to be made. So involving them strategically and obviously monitoring their satisfaction levels. So even though they won't be necessarily impacted by the decision, we want to see, are they happy with the stuff that we're doing? And some examples could be the government. It could be to do with senior managers. So not necessarily our executive ones such as a CEO or CFO, but our non-executive managers. So who approve of still fairly strategic decisions in the business. And of course, financial institutions, such as a bank, if we're going for a bank loan, they have a high level of power over us, whether we get the money that we want. Next up on the list of our stakeholder groups in our stakeholder map, we have our keep informed. And our keep informed, these are stakeholders. They are very interested in our activities and our business decisions, but they don't really have the power to influence them that much. As you can imagine, because we are keeping them informed, we do want to provide them with regular updates. Establishing that clear communication channel to tell them this is what we're doing, this is the decision that that's going to be made. And having feedback systems can also be fairly important because we don't want them to raise their concerns to stakeholders within the manage closely potentially. Because let's say, for example, our keep informed stakeholders, they become unhappy and they start communicating with, let's say, the press, who potentially is a bit more of a manage closely type of stakeholder group. So we do want to listen to their concerns just to make sure that, they aren't increasing in the level of power of their decision making or the power over us to make our decisions. So we want to show that we do care about them, because if we do show that we care about these stakeholders, not ones who can necessarily impact our decision making, it can help improve our reputation. So some examples of our stakeholders who we do want to keep involved, maybe small customers, maybe our junior and lower level employees, our managers, any small suppliers as well. Because as I said, we want to make sure that, let's say for our small supplier, that when we are making decisions, they are still happy about them. We don't want to have this negative reputation that we bully the small suppliers. We want to keep communicating with them. We want to keep having that feedback system as well. And the final stakeholder group we have is our minimal effort. Our minimal effort is on the low level of interest and the low level of power. Within our decision making, we do not want to prioritize their needs. We do not need to spend lots and lots of resources managing them, communicating with them. We only want to deliver very basic information. So for example, put in updates on the website. So if they want to, they can have a bit of a read for them. And like all of them, we do want to monitor them to make sure that they don't change in status. That we've just completely neglected this stakeholder group and now all of a sudden they're a bit of a managed closely, but we've built up a negative relationship between us and them. And just some examples of minimal effort stakeholders: general public, local community, minor competitors. These are all great examples of them. Thank you so much for watching this session on our stakeholder mapping. I hope this helped you understand the different areas, different segments of our stakeholder map, as well with the advantages and the disadvantages of using one. Once again, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.